15 years ago, Dr. Sarah Martinez received a phone call that shattered her world. Her husband Marcus was dead, killed in a mining explosion in Colombia. She buried an empty casket, raised their twin children alone, and spent a decade and a half learning to live with a ghost. But sometimes, the dead refuse to stay buried. What happened next on a beach in the Bahamas would expose a betrayal so calculated, so cruel, that it would make headlines around the world. Because a man she mourned, the father her children missed, the husband she grieved for 15 years, was very much alive, and he was playing volleyball with his new family. Pause for effect. This is the story of Sarah Martinez. A story about love, lies, and what happens when the person you trusted most becomes a person who destroys you. Welcome to True Crime Stories. I'm your host, and today we're diving deep into a case that will make you question everything you think you know about grief, betrayal, and justice. So buckle in, because this story has more twists than a surgical suture, and an ending that will leave you asking, what would you do? Let's start at the beginning. Chicago, 2005. Lincoln Park. Tree-lined streets, million-dollar townhouses, and the kind of life that looks perfect from the outside. Dr. Sarah Martinez had it all. At 35, she was one of the youngest pediatric surgeons at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. Her hands saved children's lives. Her precision was legendary. Her colleagues called her the steady hand, because nothing ever rattled her in the operating room. At home, she was simply mom to 8-year-old twins Maya and Diego. Maya, the serious one, already talking about becoming a doctor like Mommy. Diego, the comedian, who could make anyone laugh even on the worst days. And then there was Marcus Martinez. 42 years old, devastatingly charming, with the kind of smile that could light up a room. He was an environmental consultant specializing in wetland restoration. While Sarah saved lives in sterile operating rooms, Marcus saved ecosystems in muddy fields across the Midwest. Their love story was the kind people write romance novels about. They met when Marcus brought his sick nephew to Sarah's ER rotation during her residency. While other relatives panicked, Marcus stayed calm, making silly faces to keep the scared 6-year-old from crying. Sarah fell for his gentleness first, his intelligence second, his laugh third. They married in 2005 at Morton Arboretum, surrounded by 200 guests who all agreed they'd never seen a more perfectly matched couple. Their wedding photo shows them beneath century-old oak trees, both laughing at something Marcus whispered in Sarah's ear. By 2010, their life looked like something from a lifestyle magazine. Their Lincoln Park townhouse was even featured in Chicago Magazine's Homes That Heal issue. Sarah had designed a meditation garden where she'd decompress after 12-hour surgeries. Marcus had built a tree house where the twins held their secret meetings. Sunday mornings meant pancakes shaped like animals. Saturday afternoons meant family bike rides along Lake Michigan. Marcus taught the kids Spanish while Sarah practiced violin. They were building something rare in modern America, a partnership that actually worked. But here's what Sarah didn't know. Here's what she couldn't see behind that perfect smile and those gentle eyes. Marcus Martinez was drowning. Pause. The pressure of providing for a surgeon's lifestyle. The constant travel for work. The feeling that he was always one step behind his brilliant wife. The panic attacks that started small but grew larger. The growing sense that he was trapped in a life that looked perfect but felt like a prison. And trapped people, well, sometimes they do desperate things to get free. Sarah had no idea that her husband was about to make a choice that would destroy everything they'd built. A choice so selfish, so cruel, that it would haunt two families for decades. Because sometimes the people we love most are the ones capable of hurting us in ways we never imagined possible. The explosion was coming. Sarah just didn't know it yet. November 14, 2010, a Thursday. The kind of gray November day that makes Chicago feel like the end of the world. Sarah was in her office at Northwestern Memorial, reviewing surgical notes from a complex heart surgery she performed that morning on a 7-year-old boy. The operation had gone perfectly. Another life saved by those steady hands. Her phone buzzed. Unknown international number. Now, most of us would let that go to voicemail. But when you're married to someone who travels internationally for work, you answer every call. because you never know when that call might be important. Sarah answered on the third ring. Dr. Martinez? This is Agent Patricia Reeves from the U.S. Consulate in Bogota, Colombia. The world stopped. I'm calling about your husband, Marcus Martinez. Sarah's medical training kicked in. Stay calm. Process information. Don't jump to conclusions. There's been an incident, Agent Reeves continued. An explosion at a mining site where your husband was conducting an environmental assessment. I'm very sorry to inform you that Marcus was killed instantly. The words seemed to come from underwater. Sarah could hear them, but they didn't make sense. Marcus was supposed to be in Houston, a logistics conference. He'd kissed her goodbye 4 days earlier, promising to bring back Texas barbecue sauce for the twins. There must be some mistake, Sarah said. My husband is in Houston, not Colombia. A pause. Papers rustling. Ma'am, according to our records, Marcus Martinez was in Colombia as part of consultation on mercury contamination in gold mining regions. The explosion occurred at approximately 2:47 p.m. local time. A methane gas pocket ignited during the site inspection. 3 people were killed instantly. Sarah's hands went numb. Through her office window, she could see Lake Michigan, gray and choppy under November clouds. Somewhere across that water, across continents, the man who'd made her coffee that morning was gone. The Colombian authorities have recovered some personal effects. Agent Reeves continued. A wallet with your husband's identification, a wedding ring, fragments of clothing. DNA confirmation will take several weeks, but his hotel keycard was found approximately 200 yards from the blast site. Sarah found herself thinking like a surgeon. Questions, evidence, protocols. I need to see the report, she said. I need documentation. I need... Of course, doctor. The embassy will handle all repatriation logistics. Though I should warn you, there isn't much to repatriate. After she hung up, Sarah sat in her office for exactly 17 minutes, staring at the phone. Then she called her mother, then the twin school, then Marcus's consulting firm. Nobody had any answers. His firm said he'd requested time off for a special project, but hadn't provided details. His calendar showed the Houston conference, but there was no record of him actually attending. The twins took the news differently. Maya, always a protector, became fiercely independent overnight. She started making her own lunch, walking herself to school, acting like she didn't need anyone. Diego, the sensitive one, started drawing pictures. Dark pictures. Underground caves. Figures trapped in rocky spaces. When Sarah asked about them, he'd shrug and say, I think Daddy's stuck somewhere and can't find his way home. The funeral was held without a body. St. Alphonsus Church, packed with 300 people. Sarah stood at the podium, looking out at colleagues, neighbors, families from the kids' school, Marcus's environmental consulting firm. She spoke about a man who could identify bird calls from 3 blocks away, who cried during Disney movies but pretended he had allergies, who once drove 3 hours to save an injured owl they'd found in their backyard. What she didn't mention was a life insurance policy Marcus had quietly increased just 6 months before his death, from $150,000 to $500,000. When she'd asked why, he'd said, with your career taking off and the kids getting older, I want to make sure you're all protected if something happens to me. She thought it was thoughtful. Standing in that church, looking at his empty casket, she wondered if it was something else entirely. But grief doesn't leave room for suspicion. Grief demands that you survive first, question later. Sarah buried her doubts along with her husband's memory and began the long process of learning how to live as half of herself. She had no idea that the man she was mourning was about to start a brand new life, with a brand new family, using a brand new name. The first year after Marcus's death was performance art. Sarah became a master of what grief counselors call the widow's mask, composed in public, crumbling in private. She returned to surgery after 3 months because precision required focus, and focus drowned out the questions that circled her mind like hungry birds. At Maya and Diego's school events, other parents spoke in hushed tones about that poor Dr. Martinez and how remarkably well she's holding up. They didn't see her at 3 a.m., standing in Marcus's closet, breathing in the scent of his cologne, still clinging to dress shirts he'd never wear again. They didn't see her teaching herself to sleep on the left side of the bed because the right side felt too empty, too cold, too full of his absence. The twins adapted in their own ways, developing what psychologists call survival strategies. Maya threw herself into academics, earning straight A's and organizing her backpack with military precision. If she could control her homework, maybe she could control the chaos around her. Diego became the class comedian, deflecting sympathy with jokes that were too mature for a 9-year-old. My dad went to work one day and got blown up, he'd tell new kids. But don't worry, he left us lots of money. Both children learned to navigate the world of single-parent households. School forms that asked for a father's name and had to be marked deceased. Birthday parties where other kids had two parents cheering from the sidelines. Father-daughter dances that Maya refused to attend. Sarah's mother, Elena Chun, moved from San Francisco to help. A retired librarian with old-world sensibilities about proper grieving, Elena believed in mourning by the book. 1 year of black clothing, no dating for at least 2 years, and maintaining Marcus's memory like a shrine. She organized monthly memorial masses, kept his garden tools exactly where he'd left them, and gently discouraged Sarah's few attempts at social outings. Mija, Elena would say, some loves are too deep to replace. Honor what you had. But late at night, when Elena was asleep and the twins were finally quiet, Sarah found herself doing something that started innocent and became dangerous. She went through Marcus's things. It started with simple tasks, closing his email accounts, canceling subscriptions, organizing tax documents. But then she discovered gaps, bank statements showing cash withdrawals she couldn't remember, credit card charges for restaurants she'd never been to, hotel receipts from cities where he'd claimed to be camping with clients, a receipt from a jewelry store in Miami for a necklace she'd never seen, conference registrations for events he'd never mentioned, phone records showing calls to numbers she didn't recognize. The rational part of her mind, the surgeon's mind, created explanations, work dinners with clients, upgraded accommodations when camping trips fell through, conference expenses he'd forgotten to mention. Maybe he bought the necklace for her birthday and hidden it somewhere. But doubt, once planted, grows in the dark like a cancer. By year 3, Sarah had created a routine that looked healthy from the outside. She returned to dating. Carefully, slowly, introductions through friends or colleagues. She joined a grief support group at her church, where she offered comfort to newer widows while keeping her own questions locked away. She'd also done something else. Something she told no one about, not even Elena. She'd hired a private investigator, because a surgeon's mind demands evidence. And Sarah was starting to suspect that the evidence of her husband's death might not add up. The truth was waiting in a manila folder that would cost her $25,000 and change her life forever. But some truths are worth any price, even when they destroy everything you thought you knew about the person you love most. Robert Kowalski looked like the kind of private investigator you'd see in old movies. Rumpled suit, 5 o'clock shadow at noon, office above a Polish deli that smelled like kielbasa and disappointment. But Kowalski was a real deal. Former Chicago PD detective with 20 years on the force and a reputation for cases other people couldn't crack. He specialized in insurance fraud and missing persons, the kind of cases that police departments quietly abandoned when the trail went cold. Sarah found him through a colleague whose ex-husband had been hiding assets during their divorce. She made the appointment using a fake name, paid in cash, and sat across from his skeptical stare while trying to explain why a successful surgeon wanted to investigate her dead husband. Dr. Martinez, Kowalski said, leaning back in a chair that had seen better decades, "I've got to ask, what exactly are you hoping to find?" Sarah had rehearsed this conversation dozens of times, but sitting in that cramped office, her carefully prepared words crumbled. "I need to know if my husband really died in that explosion." Kowalski's expression didn't change. He'd heard stranger things. "What makes you think he didn't?" Sarah opened her purse and pulled out a folder thick with documents she'd been collecting for 3 years. Bank statements, credit card bills, hotel receipts, phone records. "None of this adds up," she said. "The timeline doesn't work. The expenses don't match his itinerary. And there's something else." She handed him a photograph, a security camera image from O'Hare Airport that she'd obtained through a friend who worked for the TSA. This shows Marcus boarding a flight to Miami on November 10th, 2010, for days before he was supposed to be in Colombia. The timestamp is clear, 11:47 p.m. He was traveling alone with just a small duffel bag. Kowalski studied the grainy image. Even in black and white, Marcus's face was unmistakable. "Dr. Martinez," he said slowly, "if your husband was in Miami 4 days before he died in Colombia, then either this photo is wrong or the death report is wrong. That's what I need you to find out." The investigation took 8 months and cost Sarah $25,000. Kowalski was thorough, methodical, and increasingly troubled by what he found. First, the mining company Marcus had allegedly been consulting for, Tierra Verde Environmental Solutions, had no public record of employing him. Their website listed current projects, none in Colombia. Their staff directory had no mention of Marcus Martinez. Second, the hotel where he'd allegedly stayed, the Casa Colonial in Bogota, had no record of a Marcus Martinez checking in during those dates. They did have record of a Miguel Vasquez, but Miguel Vasquez was a local environmental consultant who'd been living in Bogota for 6 years. Third, and most disturbing, the mining site explosion itself. It had happened exactly as reported. 3 people had died, 2 local engineers, and an American consultant named Miguel Vasquez. But Miguel Vasquez was 58 years old, had been working in Colombia since 2004, and bore no resemblance to Marcus Martinez. The DNA evidence used to identify Marcus had been processed by a small, private lab in Medellin that specialized in disaster victim identification. When Kowalski contacted them, he was told their records from 2010 had been destroyed in a fire the following year. Convenient, Kowalski noted in his report. But the most damaging evidence came from Marcus's own financial records. In the 6 months before his death, he'd made a series of cash withdrawals totaling $50,000. He'd purchased camping equipment that he'd never used. He'd booked hotel rooms in cities where he claimed to be working outdoors. And the phone records told a story that made Sarah's blood run cold. Regular calls to numbers registered in Florida, Costa Rica, and the Cayman Islands. Numbers that belonged to banks, immigration lawyers, and something called New Identity Solutions, a company that helped people establish residence in foreign countries. Dr. Martinez, Kowalski said during their final meeting, sliding a manila folder across his desk, "I can't prove your husband is alive, but I can prove he wasn't at that mining site when it exploded." Sarah opened the folder with surgeon's hands, steady, precise, ready for whatever she might find inside. The first document was a bank transfer record showing Marcus had moved $20,000 to an account in the Cayman Islands just 2 weeks before his death. The second was a credit card statement showing he'd purchased a one-way ticket to Nassau, Bahamas, departed Miami on November 15th, 2010, 1 day after he was officially declared dead in Colombia. The third was a photograph that made Sarah's world tilt sideways. Security footage from Miami International Airport showing Marcus, very much alive, walking through Terminal D at 6:23 a.m. on November 15th, 2010. He was wearing different clothes, carrying a new suitcase, and he was not alone. The woman walking beside him was young, beautiful, pregnant, and holding his hand like she owned it. "What do I do with this?" Sarah whispered. Kowalski leaned back in his creaking chair. "That's not my department. Document. I find facts. What you do with them is up to you." Sarah drove home through Chicago traffic with the folder on her passenger seat, its contents more dangerous than any surgical instrument she'd ever wielded. She had proof her husband had lied. She had evidence of conspiracy. She had documentation of insurance fraud. What she didn't have was the courage to tear apart the life she'd spent 5 years rebuilding. So she did what any rational person would do. She buried the folder in her closet and tried to pretend she'd never seen it. But the truth, once discovered, doesn't stay buried. It grows. It festers. It demands justice. And 15 years later, on a beach in the Bahamas, it would finally get its chance. July 2025. 15 years after the explosion that wasn't. The twins were 23 now, both graduated from Northwestern, Maya in pre-med, Diego in journalism. They'd grown into remarkable adults despite the shadow of their father's absence, or perhaps because of it. For Sarah's 50th birthday, they'd surprise her with something she'd never expected. A week-long trip to the Atlantis resort in Nassau, Bahamas. "Mom," Maya had said, "you've spent 15 years taking care of everyone else. Let us take care of you for once." Sarah almost said no. She'd avoided international travel since Marcus's death. Partly from anxiety about flying alone, mostly from the memories that airports triggered. Every departure gate looked like the last place she'd kiss him goodbye. But looking at her children's hopeful faces that carried traces of the man who'd abandoned them, she realized she'd been living in a cage of her own making. The resort was everything the brochure promised. Crystalline pools that seemed to stretch into the ocean itself. White sand beaches where the biggest worry was whether to order a pina colada or a mojito. Restaurants where the waitstaff remembered your name and your favorite table. Sarah spent the first 3 days decompressing in ways she'd forgotten were possible. Reading novels by the pool instead of medical journals. Getting massages that actually worked out knots she'd been carrying for years. Sleeping until 9 a.m. without an emergency surgery wake-up call. On the 4th morning, she woke before sunrise and decided to take a solo walk along the beach. The sky was painted in watercolor pastels, pink bleeding into orange bleeding into the softest blue. A few joggers passed. Hotel staff raked the sand smooth, and somewhere in the distance, she could hear children laughing. Sarah turned toward the sound, shading her eyes against the glare, and saw a family playing volleyball near the water's edge. 2 teenagers, a woman in her 40s with curly dark hair, and a man whose laugh made Sarah's world stop spinning. Even from 50 yards away, even after 15 years, even with graying hair and a deeper tan, she knew that laugh. It had echoed in her dreams and haunted her nightmares. It was a sound of Sunday morning pancakes and bedtime stories about brave knights saving dragons. It was the sound of every lie she'd ever been told, wrapped up in false joy. Marcus. He was older, wearing board shorts and a faded University of Miami t-shirt. But it was unmistakably him. Same height, same broad shoulders, same way of throwing his head back when something genuinely amused him. He spiked the volleyball over the net, and one of the teenagers, a girl with a stubborn chin and the woman's kind eyes, dove dramatically into the sand, missing the ball but making everyone laugh harder. Sarah stood frozen in the sand, her morning coffee growing cold in her hands, watching her dead husband play beach volleyball with his new family. The woman, his wife, obviously, was beautiful in an effortless way, the sort of person who probably volunteered at animal shelters and remembered everyone's birthdays. She kissed Marcus when he helped her up after a spectacular fall, and he spun her around like they were newlyweds instead of a couple who'd clearly been together for years. The teenagers were obviously theirs. The girl had Marcus's stubborn chin. The boy had his way of gesturing while talking. They were the right age to have been born after his death, which meant they'd never known about Sarah or Maya or Diego. They'd grown up believing their father was simply their father, not a man who'd abandoned his first family to create a second one. Sarah watched for 20 minutes, hidden behind a cluster of palm trees, as her husband lived his authentic life. He wasn't running or hiding or looking over his shoulder. He was home. When they finally packed up their volleyball and headed back toward the resort, Sarah followed from a distance. She watched them enter the coral towers, saw them wait for the elevator, observed the casual intimacy of people who belonged together. She also saw the name on their beach bag, embroidered in cheerful blue letters. The Rodriguez family. Pause for dramatic effect. Marcus Martinez had become Miguel Rodriguez. The irony wasn't lost on her. He'd stolen the identity of the man who'd actually died in that Colombian explosion. Sarah stood in the resort lobby for 30 minutes, watching families come and go, listening to conversations in English and Spanish in languages she couldn't identify. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that they were sharing space with a woman whose entire existence had just been rewritten, because the man she'd buried, the man she'd grieved, the man whose empty casket she stood over while promising to love his memory forever, was buying his new family ice cream at the poolside bar. And he looked happier than she'd ever seen him. That night, Sarah didn't join Maya and Diego for dinner. She told them she wasn't feeling well and asked for her meal to be sent to the room. Then she sat on her balcony with a bottle of wine and a laptop, learning everything she could about the Rodriguez family. It didn't take long. In the age of social media, lives are documented in real time. Miguel Rodriguez, marine conservation specialist. Married to Carmen Rodriguez, high school Spanish teacher. Father Sofia, 16, and Mateo, 14. Residents of Coral Gables, Florida. Members of St. Augustine Catholic Church. Regular volunteers at the Miami Seaquarium. Their Instagram was full of family photos going back years. Beach vacations, birthday parties, Christmas mornings, school graduations. The ordinary, beautiful documentation of a life lived in the light. No shadows, no secrets, no past lives buried in Colombian mining explosions. Sarah scrolled through image after image of the man she loved living a life that had never included her. And slowly, carefully, methodically, she began to plan. Because a surgeon's mind doesn't just diagnose problems, it solves them. Sarah spent the next day conducting reconnaissance with the precision she used in surgery. Every detail mattered. Every variable had to be accounted for. She discovered the Rodriguez family was staying in a 2-bedroom suite on the 14th floor. Miguel worked for a marine conservation nonprofit. The hotel concierge mentioned he was some kind of expert on coral reef restoration. Brilliant man, the concierge said. Comes here every summer with his family. Lovely people. His wife Carmen taught Spanish at a private high school in Miami. Their children, Sofia and Mateo, were honor students who spoke 3 languages and played competitive tennis. They'd been coming to Atlantis for 5 years, always during July. The hotel staff knew them, liked them. They were the kind of guests who remembered room service workers' names and left generous tips. Sarah learned that Miguel jogged every morning at 6 a.m. along the same beach route. A creature of habit, just like Marcus had been. On July 18th, she was waiting for him. She positioned herself at the turnaround point of his route, sitting on a piece of driftwood with her back to the path, watching the sunrise paint the ocean in shades of gold and pink. When she heard his footsteps approaching, the same rhythm she'd listened to for 8 years of marriage, she turned around. Hello, Marcus. He stopped so abruptly, he almost fell forward. For a moment, his face went completely blank. Not surprised, not afraid, just empty, like a computer rebooting after a system crash. Then recognition flooded in, followed immediately by something Sarah had never seen in his eyes before. Guilt. Pure, undiluted guilt. Sarah. Her name came out as a breathless whisper. They stared at each other across 15 years of lies. He looked good, healthy, tan, like a man who'd spent years living without the weight of secrets. She wondered what she looked like to him. Older, certainly. Grayer, carrying the accumulated stress of single motherhood and surgical residencies, and sleepless nights wondering if she was losing her mind. The mining explosion, she said, her voice as steady as her surgical hands. Was any of it real? Marcus, Miguel, whoever he was now, sat down heavily on the sand, as if his legs couldn't support him anymore. The explosion was real, he said quietly. Miguel Vasquez was real. He was a friend. We'd worked together on a few projects. When he died, I saw an opportunity. An opportunity. Sarah's voice was flat, clinical. To disappear. To start over. He looked out at the ocean, not meeting her eyes. Sarah, you have to understand, I was drowning in that life. The pressure, the expectations, the constant feeling that I was failing everyone. So you decided to let us think you were dead. I thought it would be easier for everyone. The insurance money would take care of you and the kids. You could move on, find someone better. The twins could have a father who wasn't constantly disappointing them. Sarah felt something cold and sharp settling in her chest, like ice forming around her heart. You thought it would be easier to let Maya and Diego grow up believing their father was dead than to just get divorced? For the first time, Marcus looked directly at her. His eyes were the same warm brown she'd fallen in love with 20 years earlier, but now they held something she'd never seen before. Self-awareness of his own cruelty. I was a coward, he said simply. I was scared of divorce courts, scared of custody battles, scared of seeing disappointment in your eyes every time I picked up the kids for a weekend visit. This seemed cleaner, Cleaner. Sarah repeated the word like she was testing its weight. Marcus. Do you know what the last 15 years have been like? Do you know that Diego still draws pictures of you trapped in underground caves? Do you know that Maya hasn't had a serious relationship because she's afraid of losing someone she loves? Marcus was crying now, silent tears tracking down his cheeks. I know I destroyed everything. I know there's no forgiveness for this. But Sarah, I need you to know, I loved you. I love the kids. That was real. Sarah stood up slowly, brushing sand from her legs with movements as precise as her surgical technique. If you loved us, she said, you would have stayed and fought for us. Instead, you chose the coward's way out and let us pay the price. She started walking away, then turned back. Your new family seems lovely. Your wife seems like a good person. Do they know what you did to get to them? Marcus shook his head, unable to speak. I thought not. Sarah smiled, but it was a cold smile she used before delivering devastating news to families in the ICU. You should probably tell them before someone else does. As she walked back toward the resort, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in 15 years. Clarity, not peace, not forgiveness, not closure, but clarity about what needed to happen next. Because a surgeon's job isn't just to diagnose the problem. It's to cut out the cancer before it spreads. Sarah didn't go to the police immediately. Instead, she spent her remaining days in the Bahamas doing what she did best, gathering evidence with surgical precision. Photos of Marcus with his new family, recordings of conversations with hotel staff who knew him as Miguel Rodriguez, screenshots of social media profiles going back years, bank records showing the Miguel Rodriguez account had been opened in November 2010, just days after Marcus Martinez had officially died. She was building a case, but not for the reasons anyone might expect. On her final morning in Nassau, Sarah made a decision that surprised even her. She didn't want revenge. She wanted something harder to achieve and more valuable than vengeance. She wanted truth. She approached Carmen Rodriguez by the pool while Marcus was getting coffee, and the kids were at the teen club. Carmen was reading a book in Spanish, occasionally laughing at something on the page. She looked like the kind of person who found joy in small things, exactly the sort of woman Marcus would fall for. "Excuse me," Sarah said, sitting down in the chair next to her. "My name is Dr. Sergio Martinez. I think we need to talk about your husband." The conversation that followed was one of the most difficult of Sarah's life. Carmen was everything Sarah had imagined: kind, intelligent, completely unaware that the man she married was already married to someone else when they met. She and Marcus had been together for 12 years, married for 10. She'd met him in Miami in 2013, where he was working as Miguel Rodriguez for a marine conservation nonprofit. He'd told her he was a widower from Colombia who'd lost his first wife in a car accident. He said her name was Isabella, Carmen whispered, her face going pale as Sarah showed her photograph from Maya and Diego's childhood. He said she died when Sophia was just a baby, and he couldn't bear to stay in Colombia with all the memories. Sarah spread out photos across the small table between them. Birthday parties where Marcus wore the same smile he now wore with his new family. Christmas mornings where he looked at Sarah the way he now looked at Carmen. School plays where he beamed with the same pride he showed for Sophia and Mateo. "I'm not here to destroy your family," Sarah said gently. "But my children deserve to know their father is alive. And your children deserve to know the truth about who their father really is." Carmen stared at the photos for a long time. When she finally looked up, her eyes were red but determined. "What do you want me to do?" Together, they crafted a plan that would have made Solomon proud. Carmen would confront Marcus that evening, demand the complete truth, and give him 24 hours to call Maya and Diego himself. If he refused, Carmen would call them personally. Either way, the lies would end. Sarah flew back to Chicago that night, leaving behind a ticking time bomb that would either heal two families or destroy them both. The call came 3 days later. Sarah was in her office between surgeries when her phone rang, showing a Florida number she didn't recognize. "Dr. Martinez?" The voice was tentative, young, nervous. "This is Sophia Rodriguez. I think my dad is your husband." And with those words, 15 years of carefully constructed lies began to crumble. Sophia had found the photos Carmen showed her father. She'd done her own research, comparing childhood pictures of Maya and Diego with recent photos of herself and Mateo. The resemblance was undeniable. They all had Marcus's eyes, his stubborn chin, his way of tilting their head when they were thinking. "My mom is filing for divorce," Sophia said, her voice shaking. "But she wants Mateo and me to know our half-siblings. She says we're all victims of the same lie." Over the next 6 months, 2 broken families began the delicate process of becoming one complicated but honest family. Maya and Diego flew to Miami. Sophia and Mateo came to Chicago. Carmen and Sarah had coffee and compared notes about the man they both loved and lost his own cowardice. Marcus, meanwhile, faced a choice he'd been running from for 15 years. He could keep running, disappear again, start over somewhere else with a new identity and new lies. Or he could stay and face the consequences of his actions. For the first time in his life, Marcus Martinez chose courage over cowardice. He flew to Chicago. The meeting took place in Sarah's Lincoln Park living room in March 2026, 16 years after a man named Marcus Martinez had supposedly died in a Colombian mining explosion. Marcus sat alone in the middle of the room, looking like he'd aged a decade in the 6 months since the Bahamas confrontation. Maya and Diego sat on one side, Sarah on the other. The silence stretched for nearly 5 minutes before Diego, now 25 and working as an investigative journalist, finally spoke. "I used to dream you were trapped in a cave," he said to his father, his voice steady but cold. "I thought if I became good enough at finding things, I could find you and bring you home." Marcus's composure cracked completely. "Diego, I'm not finished." Diego's journalistic training showed in his controlled delivery. "I spent 15 years thinking you died because I wasn't important enough to save. Maya spent 15 years thinking love meant losing people. Mom spent 15 years raising us alone while you were teaching your new kids how to play volleyball." Maya, ever the surgeon's daughter, was more clinical in her approach. "I need to understand psychology," she said. "What made you think causing this much pain was preferable to an honest divorce?" The conversation lasted 4 hours. Marcus answered every question, provided every detail, accepted every harsh truth his children delivered. He explained his panic attacks in 2010, his growing sense of being trapped, his cowardly grab at freedom through another man's death. He also shared something he'd never told anyone. He'd tried to come back twice in the early years, but both times lost his nerve when he saw how well Sarah and the twins were doing without him. "I convinced myself you were better off," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But really I was just too ashamed to face what I'd done." By the end of the day, no one was forgiven, but everyone was heard. Maya and Diego agreed to maintain limited contact with their father and to build relationships with Sophia and Mateo, who were innocent victims of Marcus's choices. Sarah agreed to drop the insurance fraud charges on one condition. Marcus would establish college funds for all 4 children, funded by the money he should have been paying in child support for 15 years. The media discovered the story 6 months later, when Diego published a first-person account in Chicago magazine titled, "My Father's Death Was Greatly Exaggerated." The article went viral, spawning documentaries, podcast series, and think pieces about modern masculinity and the psychology of abandonment. Marcus moved back to Chicago in 2027, not to reunite with Sarah. That bridge was permanently burned, but to be closer to his children and to face the consequences of his choices. He worked as a landscaper, living in a small apartment near Wrigley Field, slowly rebuilding relationships that would never be the same, but might eventually be honest. Sarah never remarried, but she did something more important. She learned to trust her instincts again. She became an advocate for families dealing with ambiguous loss, speaking at conferences about the unique trauma of loving someone who disappears without explanation. Final reflection, slower pace. The story ends not with reconciliation or revenge, but with something rarer in our modern world: truth. Marcus Martinez died in a Colombian mining explosion in 2010. But Miguel Rodriguez lived to face the damage that death had caused. Some wounds heal, some don't, but all of them deserve to be acknowledged. And sometimes that acknowledgement is the only justice possible. In her final interview about the case, Sarah was asked if she'd forgiven her husband. Forgiveness, she said, choosing her words with surgical precision, implies that what he did was forgivable. Some actions are too big for forgiveness. But understanding, that's different. I understand why he ran. I understand why he stayed away. I understand why he built a new life rather than fix the old one. Understanding doesn't heal the wound, but it stops the bleeding. Today, Sarah continues her work as a pediatric surgeon, saving children's lives with the same steady hands that once searched through her dead husband's belongings looking for answers she was afraid to find. Maya is in her final year of medical school, following in her mother's footsteps. Diego works as an investigative journalist, specializing in stories about people who disappear and the families they leave behind. Sofia and Mateo Rodriguez visit Chicago twice a year, building relationships with the half-siblings they never knew existed. They call Sarah Tia Sarah, Aunt Sarah, and she's teaching them the violin pieces their father used to love. Marcus works in silence, tending other people's gardens, growing things instead of destroying them for the first time in his adult life. And somewhere in a cemetery in Chicago, there's still a headstone that reads Marcus Martinez, beloved husband and father. The dates are wrong, but the sentiment remains true. He was beloved. He was a husband and father. He just forgot that love requires courage, not just in the beginning, but every single day after. Pause. What would you do if the person you'd mourned, the person you built your entire life around missing, walked back into your world with a new name and a new family? Is there a statute of limitations on betrayal? Can a heart break twice? Does understanding equal forgiveness? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And remember, sometimes the people we trust most are the ones capable of hurting us in ways we never imagined possible. But sometimes, just sometimes, the truth sets everyone free, even when it hurts. But here's what I need you to tell me. What would you do? You've mourned someone for 15 years, raised their children alone, then see them alive and happy with a new family on vacation. Drop your answer in the comments. Was Sarah right to expose Marcus, or should she have walked away? But wait, there's something even more twisted about this case. After this story broke, that private investigator got a call from Tampa. Another widow whose husband had died in a fishing accident. Guess what she found on his laptop? Research about Marcus Martinez and a note saying if he could do it, so can I. Marcus didn't just destroy his family. He created a blueprint for other cowards. How many other dead husbands are living new lives right now? Comment your state below. Let's map this epidemic. If this story shocked you, smash that subscribe button, because next week I will be sharing more crime cases. Share this video if you think families deserve the truth. Tell me in the comments, have you ever had a gut feeling about someone that turned out to be right? Like if you want justice for Sarah. Dislike if you think Marcus deserves sympathy. Either way, engage, because that's how we keep these stories alive and make sure victims are remembered. Until next time, keep questioning everything. In a world full of lies, the truth is the most radical act of all.